Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by once again. Well, we're opening up. It's always a slow and painful process. We want it to be faster. Definitely do a lot of that. And of course, you in turn want it that way too, I have no doubt. I think it's pretty apparent in part that one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we haven't gotten the shipments of vaccines that we'd expected to have by now. And basically, it is very clear they're being held up. In Europe and North America, people have gotten a hold of this. You guys are having, those of you from those areas, are having some troubles in your own distribution, and you're holding on to more than you need and so forth. It's just, anyhow, we know. We go through this every once in a while. We have, however, we're told now a major shipment coming in the next 3 days. And it could be one of two, or perhaps both of them. Well, fine. It looks like we're suddenly going to finally get enough. Our purpose, what we need to do next, we know, is to vaccinate anybody who is willing. It's a voluntary affair, get as many of them as possible, especially those who are vulnerable. But also the general population who wants it should have it, and they will have it. And it's free, and so forth. And we all sign up, and I signed up. It's on the internet. You know, there's a particular portal. You go there, and you give them all your information and stuff, and they take it, and they'll be sending an email, or they're making a phone call, or whatever, when the time comes. For the group that I'm a part of, for example, to show up. At least that's how it's planned. Let's hope it works that way, but I'm not worried about it. We'll keep an eye on it. That's good. We still have, however, some restrictions in place, and those will be as this vaccination program gets underway, and we have done so well in bringing the numbers down. I think we'll begin to see some loosening, some much more loosening. And we'll get over, for instance, eventually, the fact that the weekend is a lockdown period now, and that's going to change, but not at the moment. The government's trying to loosen it up without getting to such a point that we end up with a problem before we're ready to deal with it. We're all concerned about the variants, guys. These are the people causing all sorts of problems. We get some really unpleasant stories are starting to come through about how this is caught on in some areas. Well, and we don't have that vaccine that other countries have. And we're getting it. We've had some, but hardly enough. And that's mostly for our health professionals, of course. We need these others, and we need to get that level of vaccination up there high enough so we have a fighting chance of holding off, or at least keeping under control anything that's coming down the road. You never know, but we're going to be a lot better off with it than without it. So that has a major impact. But I'm not making excuses for anything. The bureaucracies do what bureaucracies do. But I'm not worried about it either. I know it will come together. And there's a terrific amount of pressure for opening things up. And it will happen. It's happening. It's happening now. And people are coming. And we're beginning to get the first stories of people who've dealt with foreigners coming in. Guys, we know it's very cold where you're coming from, whether it's North America or Europe. Right now, the U.S. and Canada, as I speak, it's horrifically cold up there. It's outrageously so. But the key point is we understand that when you get here, it's like a vacation. Ooh, I mean, it's 80-something degrees Fahrenheit here. It's like, wow. Who needs a mask? You. You need it because you'll rapidly see and learn very quickly and be reminded of by somebody, if you don't immediately see it, is the wearing of masks. All I'm going to suggest to you is that, the comment runs along like this. He took his mask off, and then he asked me if it was all right if he took his mask off. Well, the answer was, of course, no. We don't do that. But she's a real estate agent. She has to do. It's one of those moments she feels like she's really been slapped across the face. She's got a mask on. And he's standing there without his mask looking like, God. People can look like such, they don't look particularly bright at times like that. So anyhow, the critical point is to use some common sense. do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. You are a guest in the country to follow the regs. Do follow the rules to the extent possible. If you're going to ask for something like that, do that before you take the mask off. Respect the decision that's made, recognizing that if the person, if you're not going to have masks, the least you need to do is put some distance between you. You don't want to be sitting side by side. I mean, give it some common sense here. It is a disease. It kills people. We know, all right? And our health system knows. And we're a small enough country. We know what goes on in these hospitals. So, please, just keep that in mind. Then there's this other issue I hate bringing up, but it's one of those things you need to say it and get through it, because I don't want any political talk on this particular. I've avoided that religiously over the last couple of years. But folks, especially for Americans, you went through a very emotional election last year. You feel very, very powerfully about it. You are divided and so forth. We all know the story over and over and over again. We're moving on. You're still dealing with it. We understand that. Perfectly logical. You're a democracy, et cetera, and so forth. However, there are people in the real estate community, and particularly the expats who are involved in this sale of real estate here, but also many of the Panamanians and others who have spent, Latin Americans, who have spent considerable time in the U.S. And one little game that's played, I'm going to be blunt here, and let's tell you to your face, they'll find out who you supported. Maybe indirectly, maybe subtly, maybe just ask you, what do you think about that election last year? The one thing about Americans is they tend to be, once the subject comes up, bang, you're going to get a lecture, you're going to get very strong emotional feelings, sharing, what have you. What people do here, that's what they want to hear, okay? Then they're going to repeat it right back at you. They're going to agree with you 100%. They're going to be so pleased that he was elected, or so shocked that he wasn't, and so forth. They're going to do that because they found the button, the magic button that emotionally gets you rolling. And they're identifying with you. And they're not hugging you because that's dangerous with COVID. But in a stretch sense, they are reaching out to say, oh, we are brothers. We have so much in common. And because of the emotion is running so heavily there in the U.S., with not everybody, but with a large number of people, there's that comfortable sense that, gee, he understands. He understands how we feel. I mean, that's wonderful. I wish everybody felt that way back home, that sort of thing. It's done for a purpose, guys. And the ones who are the most overt with it are the Americans. But I've seen some silver-tongued Latin American and Panamanian agents who can just, they just work it like crazy. It's useful and you make money on it. So my solution to this is not to suggest to anything about it. In other words, when the subject comes up, say, thank you, I've had enough politics. I'm not down here for that. I'm here to take a look at what you got to offer. Now, let's talk about the rental market. Let's talk about sales and what have you. Let's talk about Panama. I don't want to talk about that. And just close it down. And when another attempt's made, keep it closed down. Recognize it's not being done to help you. All right? So, just wanted you to know that. And they may be sincere in what they're saying. It doesn't make any difference. You're not there to be buddies. You're there to do business together, which means be cordial, be friendly, be serious, but don't get involved in politics and religion. Two major subjects. Just don't go anywhere near them, and you'll be far, far better off. And don't let somebody push a button. All right. Now, what we've got going on, and I'm just dealing with the case here, a case there, a case there, and what people have been telling me who've been coming in. So this is hardly, nobody has the right to tell you what's going on in the market in Panama today, because it's just so split up into many little pieces. There aren't many people here, and different people, different agents and agencies attract different kinds of people. So what's true for one will not be true for another, and so forth. But generally speaking, most of the people who are coming down are new to the area. They will have this tendency of believing they understand real estate because they know it well in their own country, even though they don't know it well here, which is unfortunate because they can make mistakes. I've seen this. I mean, all this earlier in this century. And wow, did I see people throw money around like crazy. There is a tendency to buy what has sold in the past, indicating that that's probably what's going to sell in the future. On what grounds? Now, you got to remember that we've had a slump in the housing, in the real estate market here that started well before anybody was even thinking of the word pandemic. You could see it in 17 and certainly by 18, 19, very clear, especially in the beach area to the west of the city, to a lesser extent in the city, but particularly the beach area. And we had some serious problems there, and the pandemic just made them worse, but it didn't start them. Okay, so you need to be cautious. You need to be aware that you can buy, you can rent. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail because I'm not qualified to do that, but you can always ask about it for somebody, your lawyer, for example, when you get here. I'm not even sure if the president has signed off on it yet, to tell you the truth. It just occurred to me today. But we're passing legislation. It's going to pass and be signed into law if it hasn't already, which is sometimes called lease to buy or rent to buy. If you're familiar with it, it's basically where an agreement, a particular type of agreement, a contractual agreement is made between the person who owns the house and the person who wants to rent it, that the rent payments made can be applied to the purchase of the house at a later date if the renter decides he or she wants to buy it. Now, how you determine what they're going to pay and everything, all the details here are different than they would be for a normal contract. But this is quite popular. It doesn't require that the person who initially is renter must buy. No. It's still a decision on their part. But it sets it up so that if they do, they get some benefit from this. I'm going to stop right there. It might be right for you, and it might not be right for you at all. It also can be a little bit more expensive than if you just went out and bought. But I'm not going to worry about it because I wanted you only to know about it, so that if you come down and you're talking to a lawyer or a real estate agent, ask them. Now, people would much prefer if you just bought the house, and even many of the agents aren't going to know the mechanics of doing this until we get more information out there. But the lawyers should, obviously. And by the time you're here, it's probably going to be history. So to speak, it will have been widespread. The legal professions should certainly know about it and spread the word around. They're hoping that this is going to make a major change. But it's not going to make any good to you or them or anybody else if you aren't aware that it exists. And I talk about things here sometimes that you might not hear elsewhere because I think it's important that you know about them before you get here. And when you get here, you have something on your list of things to talk about. Now, I'm going to finish up this evening. I wanted to do something just a little bit different. I often talk about Panama as if there were like two Panamas, one of the 20th century and one of the 21st century. Well, that's true. It actually sort of sums it up purely by coincidence. But what's happened since the big boom here in Panama started in the early part of this century, so much has occurred that, as I said in the past, people who lived here in the 90s come back and they're just blown away by everything that's changed. Much has happened, and much more is happening than you or even I know about. I mean, I can't keep up with it all. There's so much. I do my best. A lot of stuff coming down the road that's very exciting. But how can I sum this up in a way that helps you understand and why it's important just to have a clue as to it? You don't need all the details, okay? I'm going to show you a set of statistics, actually two graphs, that when I get the newsletter for Retirement Wave done will be included there, so you're getting an advanced view of these, that give you an idea of what I mean when I said there are two Panamas. And the second Panama is the one you're looking at living in and being part of, and not the first one. So how can I do that in a simple way? And the answer is coming up here. I just have a couple charts. I'm going to grab hold of those, and then I'll try to explain my best. Hang on. Okay, I'm back now. If you want to take something that everybody knows about, so to speak, and they think they really know about it in more detail than probably anything else about Panama, it's the canal. And they would say the canal is the critical factor. And Panama's success and its stability and everything else. The true story is a little bit more involved with that, and it's indeed, it's the backbone of the country's economy. There's no question about that, and we love it, you know. But it's also a question of what's being done with it. There are two canals, and both are critical, and both are still in operation today. So as long as you understand that there are two of them, you begin to understand, because one of them is the 20th century and one is the 21st century. One of them was built in the first opening years, 1914, it was operating. And the one in the 21st century began its operations in 2016, 102 years later. Now, there are two, and they are quite different. The expansion of the canal included not only brand new locks to be used to raise the ships and lower them, alongside the old ones that are still in use, but they also meant widening the channels. It meant dredging to get a deeper draft so that you could bring in larger and heavier ships and through the canal. It was a huge, huge, huge project. It took quite a few years here to get done. It showed the foresight that has become the hallmark of the Panama Canal Authority back in the 20th century and also in the 21st. And they haven't lost a beat. They just sort of keeps moving on. It's a force into its own, force of nature. And they do exceptionally good work. They have a real vision. They really look ahead down the future. They really go out. They talk to the shippers and the various governments and what have you. They're constantly in communication with the people who purchase their services. They do a terrific amount of market research. Now, that's something that is simply not done by the real estate industry here. This is very aggravating because it's like you have the old style, which is the real estate sector, and then you have this new style. But most people aren't really aware of what that means when I talk about the Canal Authority being a good example of this. So here we go. Here it is. Now, I'm going to show you a chart, and on it is the income from the canal from 2016 through 17, 18, 19, and last year, 2020. We have the final stats for that. So you can see what happened. And at the beginning of, well, early on, let's say, in 2020, people started to worry about what was going to happen to canal income. And indeed, as we got into the pandemic, those early months, income started to flag. I mean, this is global trade. It was taking a hit. And by June, it had reached a level it hadn't been seen in quite a while. And people were very much concerned. And then it started to rise. So what happened for the year as a whole, and this is critical to the story here, and here it is. As you can see, it looks as if nothing happened in 2020, except it rose, it continued to rise. This is as good a news as you can possibly have. You have the rest of the world going to hell in a handbasket. Here it is just climbing up. And so people will say, well, that has nothing to do so much with Panama or the Canal Authority today or the 21st century. It's just a continuation of what's always been going on, right? No, wrong. So how do we look at it and understand the difference? And now the next graph that I'm going to show you is a little bit different. It shows exactly the same numbers, but they're divided into two sections. Each year will have two columns. The blue column on the left will be for what are called Panamax ships. Now, those are the ships that could be handled by the old canal, the old locks. And so those that continue to use those old locks, that size ship, that blue line represents their contribution to the income of the country, and that would be the income from the canal if there was no expansion, because the red line column, which is right next to it, is from what are called Neo-Panamax. These are the much larger ships that are now can be handled at the canal because of its expansion. so we can see what sort of contribution the new expanded canal, the second canal, so to speak, has made to the canal as a whole, as an entity. Right? And that, I think, is an excellent example of the difference between the 20th and the 21st centuries in Panama today, and here it is. I think that's about as dramatic as you can get. As you can see, in 2016, things just got rolling. Now, you saw in the old was that it continued to rise, but what you're seeing here is that the old canal, that blue column, fell and has continued to fall and is at its lowest level now in the last 5 years. That would be the total amount of money made by the canal, except it isn't, because that red column is the result of the expansion and when it first started to contribute income to the country in 2016. It has grown, as you can see, very rapidly, and it is now, it has been actually, as of 2019 and 2020, the majority of the money coming into the country, and almost a majority in 2018, is coming from the expansion. So there's your two canals. Both are critical, and no one wants to say that the first canal was any less or more important than the second. They're both critical, but if we hadn't built that second one, if the authority had not had the vision to see what was going on, if they hadn't done the market research really that they needed to do and connected with the people who use these services and found out what they wanted and what they were willing to pay for, this would never have happened. This wasn't just done because it seemed like a nice thing to do. It was a huge investment by the country at that time, and it was put up to a national referendum. We voted, and whether the Panamanian people voted, on whether they wanted to do it or not because of the size of the debt that we were going to be getting into in order to do it, over $5 billion. And both sides, the critics and the supporters, had their day. And the result was about 80% said, yes, let's do it. The important point there was that the public took part in it. They bought into it. They supported it. It wasn't something the politicians had just dumped in their lap and forced. Now, it's a good thing. That's a very good way to deal with these things. So as a result, it had that kind of support. It got done, and it has done very, very well. And now the canal is already, they're just putting out recently bidding documents for the design and eventually the implementation of a $2 billion project that is also meant to to improve the canal now, to get the ball rolling for what is expected to come down in the next few years. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. It will have some influence, though, and indirectly in the real estate market. We may talk about it at some point, but the point is that they are always out there in front, and they're very, very competent people. They're very quiet. They do their job. They're deeply respected in this country. So there's your two Panamas, the one on the 20th and the one on the 21st. Neither one is worthy of being criticized, and it's not like the old one, we want to get rid of it. It's just passing. Whereas the new one is coming on strong, and we're benefiting from both. And that's really the critical issue to get across. Why are we doing as well as we're doing? Why are we so far out in front of the other countries? Why did we reach the highest level of per capita GDP in the country, in the region? Why things work so well? And people want to say, well, it's because of what had been done before. It's just the canal, that's all. And they don't understand. There's massive more, and we'll talk about it at some point, that's going on, as well as the canal. But the canal itself is not just the story of the last century. It's the story of both centuries. So I wanted to share that with you, give you a little bit of an idea of why I look at Panama as being different than a lot of people look at it, and why it's going to have, all of this has impact on real estate. And this sort of thing has a positive impact on real estate, but not all real estate equally. So we'll talk more about that later. Now that we're into a point where people can actually come down and start making some decisions and looking and buying and so forth, God willing, we'll be able to continue to do that and to open up ever more. You never know in this world. We cannot take anything for granted. We go one week to the next and hope for the very best. And for those of you right now who who are, wherever you are going through the same sort of struggle we're going through with this pandemic, and heaven alone knows maybe 16 other things happening in your country. You have your brothers and sisters. We feel connected to you. Let's hope that we all get through this successfully, and I look forward to talking to you the next time. Thank you for dropping by.